Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Cthulhu Dark Providence from CMON Games. Cthulhu Dark Providence is a re-implementation of A Study in Emerald, designed by Martin Wallace. This is co-designed Martin Wallace and Travis Chance from CMON Games, and it's worth noting, this is a few things are worth noting. First of all, this is a pre-production copy, not a prototype, it's pre-production, near final, but some small things are, not necessarily final in the game. And secondly, and very importantly, please note that we did do paid content on this channel around the game. There was a paid playthrough on the channel, you can check that out. There's an additional playthrough over on Patreon as well, and while this review is not paid, I completely understand any concern around cross-contamination or impacting the opinion and any of those things. So by all means, if this opinion doesn't, if the opinion, the coverage, any of it doesn't work for you in this video, completely understand that. I just want to make sure you're fully informed going in. But with that said, and rest assured, we'll be covering things we like, don't like, and can see others not liking, just like in every other video. In any case, going into this one, Cthulhu Dark Providence. What is this game? How does it work? It's a 1 to 5 player game of strategic deduction. That's not the official label they have on this one. I believe it's officially called a hidden roll game, but I think it falls far more into the genre of strategic deduction. That's a term coined by Ivy Games. It applies to a handful of games I've played over the years, from Clans to, Veiled Fate from Ivy Games, to a recent one whose name is escaping me at the moment, but then also Cthulhu Dark Providence. And the idea of strategic deduction is the idea that you have a hidden roll. You have players who have specific hidden roles in the game, but I don't actually need to figure out what your role is. I just need to win, and incidentally being able to discover or deduce your role will help me strategically play the game. So it's strategic deduction. Knowing and deducing your role helps me play and plan and block accordingly, but is not actually an essential component to winning the game. That's the core idea of this. This is a strategic deduction in which players are going to be either a cultist, an investigator, or alternatively, we have cultists, we have investigators over here, and we have dissident cultists and dissident investigators, and these roles are key to actually muddying the waters in a way that makes the whole game state very interesting and less obvious what people are doing, because just because I'm doing something that makes it seem like I'm a cultist, I might also be one of those middle roles that completely mix things up. A lot of interesting things going on here, but ultimately let's go ahead and tell you how to play the game. In the game, you're going to be trying to get points effectively, which seems like a reasonable thing to do in many games. And you're going to be tracking your points on this track over here, and that's also going to be one of the end game triggers. Depending on the player count, you'll get to a various number of points, and that will trigger end game. Additionally, when these tracks reach the top over here, that could trigger end game, but so can killing a player unless they are a cultist player. If they're a cultist player, killing them doesn't actually end the world. They kind of want all death and madness and destruction, so that won't be a game end trigger. But when the game ends, you're going to go ahead and add up a bunch of points for how well you did in this track, various other things you got, so various portals you've got, various other ways to score additional points, killing characters, and every role does score a little differently. We're not going to heavily go into all of them, but we will touch upon different things. Every role has their own special way or different ways that they add extra points to the game at the end of the game, but you're going to add all that up and see who won. Now in the game itself, you're going to be taking 2 actions every single turn. You're going to be taking actions with a hand of cards over here, so it's a deck building game as well. You're going to have a hand of cards over here, and ultimately you're going to be taking actions driven by these symbols on your cards. So for example, over here, you can see that we have these symbols over here. So this, and that. Over there, those are going to be supply symbols we can use to trigger that action. We can alternatively use these money symbols or those symbols over there to take a very strength action. Basically, you're going to look at the cards you have, and you have a starting deck, but a whole bunch of deck building going on in the game, and you're going to go ahead and build out, you're going to take an action based on these symbols you have. Now, one of the more common actions you're going to take over here is going to be adding cubes to various locations in the game. So I can go ahead and discard these cards over here and add some of my cubes, 3 in particular, to go ahead and add them to the card that I'm on. Now, you can add them anywhere you want. The card you're on is just going to go ahead and add an extra strength to that card. So over here, I'm trying to basically lock in Heart Island by putting cubes on it. When the board goes around, when it's other players' turn, they'll have the opportunity to add cubes to locations as well. And the reason that's important is every single time at the beginning of your turn, the first thing you can do, you can only do it once per turn, but at the beginning of your turn, you can take control of any one thing that you have the most influence over. And so the game is often, across the whole thing, and there's a lot of stuff to go over here, we're going to have these 12 cards in the game, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You also have the 12 locations of the game over here, the locations underneath the cards, and you're also going to have 3 of these Mythos cards as well that are going to be in play, and all of those 27 options are places where you can put your influence cubes to try to gather those things, and we'll explain a bit more all those things in a second. Which effectively means at the beginning of the game, you have 27 different things to vie for, and they're all going to help you in different ways, but as you put your influence cubes on locations, if other people challenge you, you'll have to go back and forth trying to see who ultimately ends up at top. But at the start of your turn, if you have the most influence cubes in any area, you can go ahead and cash in that area, taking your influence cubes, putting them off into limbo over here, where you have to earn them back later, and then gathering that card, putting in your discard pile, or alternatively taking control of a location or a Mythos card instead. That's the general core concept of everything you're going to be doing. Now you're trying to gather all these things, as other cards and symbols we'll get to soon. As far as why you're gathering those things, well, the cards you're gathering primarily because they're going to add to your actual strength in the game. They might be various people in the game. If you have Kana Mishima over here, we're going to go ahead, we're going to find her token, we're going to grab that token, and we're going to put it onto one of our standees, and now we have a new character we can utilize in the game. In her case, she's worth a point, and she also gives a ton of symbols we can use. This card over here is going to be a stronger card because of how many different symbols. Now, whenever you play it, you can only count one type of symbol at any given point, but it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of symbols in terms of this double track raises over here to raise these tracks, which can be a huge part of the game. Locations you're going to gather because ultimately they're worth points. As you go ahead and take control of a location, you're going to get those points at the end of the game if you maintain control of that location. The problem is, just because I have a location doesn't stop somebody else coming in and going ahead and adding one of their own cubes there and forcing me to either continuously put my own cubes there to try to protect myself, which can be a losing game, especially if you have a lot of locations and other players are constantly trying to challenge you. There's only so much control you have as far as maintaining control. Although I will say, maintaining control requires cubes, versus taking control back is a limited once per turn action. So you're going to be constantly trying to gain control of locations for the points there. You're also going to be moving to various locations, and one of the other actions you can take is trying to open or close a gate over here. These are going to be gate tokens, which you can go ahead and try to open or close them, but and doing so will potentially give you points depending on which faction you are. This goes back to the faction aspect. Some factions want to open gates, some factions want to close gates. There are more ways to close gates than to open gates, but there's factions have more ways as far as killing people. They'll get, if you're a cultist, you'll get points for opening gates and get points for killing other players as well, whereas if you're not a cultist, if you're an investigator, you'll get points for closing the gates, which is a little easier. So there's a lot of a trade-off as far as all the things going on here. You're also going to get points then in the game for which track you're going up of here. Depending on which faction you are, you're going to get points for one of these two tracks, and again, different ways to get up different tracks. So while the investigators benefit from easier ways of closing gates, whenever the final card in a pile is taken, you're going to bump this up too, which means the cultists benefit from an easier track to move up. So there's a bunch of different factors going on as far as what benefits each side. But ultimately, you're gathering cards because of the abilities and the icons they give you. You're taking control of locations because of the fact that they will give you points. It's you're going to go ahead and open and close gates because depending on which side you're on, that will give points or possibly deprive points. You're taking control of Mythos cards because these go into your tableau over here. These Mythos cards will go into your tableau and they give you unique ways as far as different abilities that are just ongoing abilities, or sometimes you have to discard one of these, but there's a whole stack of these cards that will give you an absolute ton of ways to add just general tableau building to your game. Meanwhile, you're using money over here, using the money symbols on your cards to either go ahead and take control of, to be able to gather new cubes into your supply, because these influence cubes, you start with only a handful of them, they are frequently going in limbo, and if you only have the starting cubes you have, there's only so much you can do across the course of the game. But every 2 money you spent will get you another cube. But money is also used to be able to navigate around the board. If you want to move around the board from location to location, you have to pay the monetary cost between locations to be able to move to where you want, and your people add strength to locations they're in, but additionally, they're also the only way to actually go ahead and either kill other players, assassinate other characters, or open and close gates. You're going to need specific characters and specific symbols to be able to take those actions. That's another aspect as far as why you're moving around the board. You're trying to juggle all that and then killing players. I don't really talk about this heavily, but one of the things you can do is you can assassinate other players. There are rules as far as around how that works. Assassinating another player's main character requires them to be their only character. They cannot have other characters in the game, other assistants or people they've recruited, but also they have to have at least 5 points. So there's some degree of hold off for that to happen, and it can trigger an endgame situation. It can, if you kill another player's character, that can trigger endgame in the game. So you're trying to do all of this stuff while being mindful of going insane at the same time. Whenever you go ahead and open and close gates, you're also going to be drawing from this bag, and there's other things that will cause you to do these sanity checks, and drawing tokens from the bag, depending on whether they're green or purple, will influence whether you eventually get your third green. There's purple over here, so you're safe now, but when you get your third green, I'm safe. When you get your third green, you'll go insane, and again, if you're a cultist, that doesn't actually trigger the end game, but it will trigger your card being revealed. But if you're not a cultist, that triggers the end game. Meanwhile, cards being revealed is a factor as well. you get 3 points in the game if your card has not been revealed, versus you lose those points if your card has been revealed. You lose even more points if you're a dissident character who has your card being revealed. Dissidents benefit from a bit of a manipulation. They benefit from different things that benefit cultists and investigators, so they have a bit more room for being a little clever in their play, but that also means it costs them more if their role is revealed as you play through the game. That's a bit of a mishmash of things going on here. This is not the easiest game to immediately understand, but it is an easy game to set up and table and play once you understand the core concepts. The basic idea is you have 2 actions per turn. You draw a hand of cards, you utilize the actions on those cards, the symbols on those cards, to be able to do different things. Cards might have text on them, in which case they'll either be an actual action, so for example over here, you have a card that's an actual action and a card that's a free action. Free action, as it implies, does not count against your 2. Actual action does. So you're using cards for the symbols or for their actions. You are opening gates, closing gates, traveling between locations, putting cubes down on cards. Your first action every turn, and only your first action and only once per turn, can be to claim something where you have the most influence cubes. Meanwhile, other players are trying to challenge you on those influence cubes. Whoever wins the combat, whoever wins the back and forth and takes the card, their cubes will go to limbo. Other players will get their cubes back. So there's an aspect to losing that's not as punishing as winning the game. And you're doing all this to try to suit whatever role you have. Generally being as an investigator, you're primarily trying to close gates and just score points across the board from control of locations, from cards, and things like that. And as a cultist, you are primarily trying to close gates, open gates. I may have said that wrong, because an investigator is trying to close gates, as a cultist you're trying to open gates and kill other characters. There's more room for the madness. Both sides benefit from these tracks, and dissidents benefit from a combination of each of the things, depending on whether you're a dissident cultist or a dissident investigator. Do that until you trigger an endgame condition, add up all the points, and see who won in Cthulhu Dark Providence. That's basically how you play the game. Few other things that I didn't get into every little detail, but the good news is there's a playthrough on the channel you can go ahead and watch. You can check out the playthrough, and like I said already, there's another playthrough over on Patreon if you want to check out that. With that, let's go ahead and talk about my actual opinion of the game, getting into the pros, the cons, what I like, don't like, and consider as not liking. Starting off with what I like over here, which is the amount of things you can do in this game, which could be a con for some. It might go into the category of what I can see others not liking, the sheer informational overload on this game. But for me, the informational overload is present. The first time you sit down to the table over here, you are looking at 27 different options, and many of those options have text. Well, this one doesn't have that. Many options have text on them that you have to read, and the idea of reading every single one of the 12 cards you have, the idea of processing what each of the locations do. We haven't heavily talked about it, but as you get a person, you're going to add a person. Whenever you get a city over here, whenever you take control of a city, you're going to find the matching city card and put it into your deck. And those have the symbols printed over here. So you can have some idea of what, in addition to the points you're getting, you're also taking the card. But that will transfer back and forth from players as they take control back. And so there's just a ton of informational overload in the game, which can be a downside. But for me, it doesn't stop me from enjoying the experience, and it gives me so many options on the table. Every single turn you take in this game, every single time you play this game, there are so many cards, there are so many Mythos cards, there's so many locations and characters and everything going on that I have not seen nearly enough of what this game has to offer as far as the full. Every time I play, I discover a new card I haven't seen before in this game. There's so much going on here that it gives you a ton of things to consider while you try to work out how to build out your engine, how to build out your deck, how to drive your win condition depending on which faction you are in the game. And there's a combination of deck building from the actual building of your deck, and then the tableau building from the Mythos cards, as well as the control of the board itself, trying to move around the board, take control of locations, slowly get more and more of your tokens out, and slowly put the pressure on the other players as you build up, 20 points on this track over here by forcing other players to encounter and engage with the sheer amount of points you're gathering from any of the things you're doing. It's a very satisfying game, which gives you satisfying turns because every single turn you have 2 actions, and the amount of things you want to do every single turn is like 7 actions, which means every single turn you're just constantly trying to choose what makes the most sense. You're trying to work with the hand of cards you have, trying to figure out what actions to take as far as how to combine your symbols, which cards to hold to your hand, hoping you'll get a nice complement of symbols, when to be able to utilize those to ramp up these tracks over here, because you can get a nice swing up these tracks if you have enough of these cards over here. If you get Arkham and also James Horace Rose, which actually fits nicely with Arkham, that's going to give you a lot of freedom to shoot up the cultist track as far as how that goes. There's just a ton of things to consider as you go. There's multiple paths to victory, multiple ways to try to find your points in the game, multiple ways to lean into your role, either a bit more obviously or a bit more covertly, that's what I'm looking for. A bit more covertly as you try to figure out how you're going to win the game. Overall, ultimately, it comes down to the fact that there's powers and abilities, a ton of variability, and enough strategic decision that the combination of those 3 things give me an overall good experience. As far as things I don't like about the game, I have two things, one a nitpick and one a slightly bigger deal. Well, not really even that big a deal, but well, you'll see. First of all, the nitpick-wise, the board is not the best. As far as the art and the way these locations look over here, there's two different aspects. Visually, I'm just not necessarily into the board. I think the card art looks great. The board I'm just not visually into. But more practically speaking, tracking where a location is, that this whole thing is a location, and this symbol means you can move from here to here. But over here, you have to kind of see that it covers, like you have to move the cards out of the way. If the cards are in any way missing something, trying to track all the ways these things connect is not intuitive. You can do it, make no mistake. You can track it out, but this is not an intuitive board as far as what actually connects to what, and you will frequently find yourself surprised as you try to take a turn and realize that things ultimately don't connect the way you thought they did. So, not the end of the world, but definitely a small nitpick there. I'll also say that for a hidden role game, this doesn't feel so much as like a hidden role game. Like I said earlier, to me this feels like strategic deduction as far as the way hidden roles play into the game. It's not necessarily about a hidden role, it's about, hey, if I can be a bit more subtle, then you don't necessarily know the ways to stop me or help me or any of those things. Just to give you the most basic example, if you're playing a 4-player game and you're a cultist and that means you benefit from moving this track up, well, if the other player who has the most points who looks to be a threat is also a cultist, well then moving this track up also helps them, so it doesn't even help you. So having the information of what you are, well, you know what you are, having the information as to what they are, what their role is, gives you more agency for, do I push up this track or not? Because I want to help myself, but am I ultimately helping my competitor at the same time? If they're the person currently winning the game, that's a waste of time. I should rather instead hope that he does it. And there's a little game of chicken going on there too when it comes to these tracks, because, for example, when you go ahead and move up a track, as soon as someone moves up a track intentionally with an obvious sense, at that point, if I'm the other person on the team, I'll let them put in the work. I'd rather put my work, effort, and agency into things that help me personally, as opposed to things that help my faction, especially if you're already moving up that track. Which means it's a bit of a game of chicken of neither person moving up the track, which is fine as long as both sides are doing that. But if the other side is moving up their track, well, the other side's slowly moving up and someone's getting hurt, someone's getting screwed, but you know, who knows how it plays out. So do I just try to figure out what everyone does? Ultimately, this is a game of strategic deduction, which gives you a lot of room for the deduction part, but I've always found strategic deduction to be an interesting genre in the sense that more often than not, I find that being too subtle can actually penalize you more than just being open, at which point it loses some of that hidden role. To this game's credit, I will say that the dissonant roles do add a lot of room to not be as certain as to what players' roles are. If not for the dissonant roles, this would very much fall into strategic deduction 100% for me, which is something that just the way it works out for me, I don't tend to like it as much. I think the dissonant roles throw enough chaos into the mix that I can still lean into what I'm doing and it's still not as obvious, leaving room for that deduction to figure it out. So overall, it's not a hidden role game to me, it's strategic deduction, and while strategic deduction is an avenue and an area that I've had some problems with, I do still have some problems with it here, but overall, it still ultimately works without necessarily being something that adds to the game, so much as something that just doesn't take away from the game that much, if that makes sense. As far as I can see others not liking, a few things here. First of all, especially if you're playing at a higher player counts, this definitely has a degree of drag down the leader. If you're playing a game and someone has more points, it is easy to try to find ways to take points from them, especially if they have any board control whatsoever. You're going to find ways to just take away their points. This game definitely has that aspect of, look, Jack's winning, let's go ahead and stop him, take his locations, assassinate his characters, do as much as possible to just like ruin him. You know, expose his hidden role card, let's kill him, let's figure it all out, let's do what we need to do. So I definitely think there is some degree of pull down the leader. You have to play the game being mindful of that. Don't be too obvious. Try to have as many points as possible from hidden sources as much as you can, but you have to know the game, but it can be a factor if you don't like that in games. This definitely has that. Similarly, if you don't like any degree of aggression, this game has attacking players. For the most part, it is a Euro game. For the most part, it's about doing your own thing while trying to just get ahead of other players. But there is actual, you know, straight up assassination of other characters where you just take them off the board and kill them, and congratulations, I just bought somebody, and a turn later you killed them, and yay, I just lost the person that I spent 2 turns trying to get, and I'm happy about that. And it doesn't happen like that all the time, but that does happen, so you have to be okay with that as a context. This is not a peaceful game, it is a mostly peaceful game. I'll also say that the game has a raising the track aspect. Well, we kind of touched upon this already, but raising these tracks over here does have a degree of a stalemate issue over here, where again, if one player moves up too quickly, the other player might back off entirely, so you want to be mindful of not moving up too quickly. The flip side is if you don't move up at all, it can trigger the opposing side to benefit, so that's an interesting balance over there. And then something like I said at the beginning, that I like all the amount of choices and options you have, but that can absolutely be information overload. There are 27 possible actions you can take on your first turn of this game. Not even more than that, but there's 27 possible things to go for. More than that in terms of the actions you can take, and that's just a lot of choice on the table. And from those, at least 15 of those have new information. At least the 12 cities are static game to game. But the 15, the 12 other cards and the 3 Mythos cards, that's just a lot of information, so you have to be okay with that level of mentally taking on when you dive into it, because, well, it's a lot. That may just not be your thing. As far as final thoughts on Cthulhu Dark Providence, I overall fairly enjoy this game. I think the game, like I said already, I think I said it best when I said that there's 3 main things that combine nicely to give me all the things I want. There's deck building and tableau building. There's a ton of variety to the actual gameplay as far as the sheer amount of stuff you can consider, and then it ties all that with a strategic package that between the variety and between the strategic gameplay, it gives me a good experience. It gives me enough things to feel rewarded as I dive into it, to feel like there's always more stuff that I want to do, and there's always multiple ways to approach victory in this game. You can win with your role revealed, you can win while being completely hidden, you can win as any faction, you can win while pursuing different ways to try to get points, more board control, more killing other characters, more moving up the tracks. There's a lot of things you can do in this game, and ultimately the experience is very enjoyable, while not necessarily being the best game ever, but it's a good game, and it plays fairly snappy too. I mean, this game comes in, I've played this game several times by now, and I'd say that generally the games come in at around an hour to an hour and a half for the most part. I think the longest I've played is an hour and 45, and that's, like, yeah, it's a fairly snappy game as far as things go for the amount of gameplay you get out of it. So for me, this is a 4 out of 5. I enjoy it, I like it, I don't, like, maybe there's some small aspects hold it back for me, but overall, a very enjoyable game. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, I mentioned Strategic Deduction, I'll mention Veiled Fate over here. Veiled Fate from IV Games is another strategic deduction game that again has you pursuing your own options while being mindful of trying to keep your roles as hidden as possible as you play through it. Another game that also has a degree of strategic deduction that I should have mentioned, because it's in my recommendations, I should have mentioned it earlier, is Nanty-Narking. Nanty-Narking is actually interesting. I'm only just putting this together. Nanty-Narking is designed by Martin Wallace. It's a re-implementation of Discworld from Martin Wallace, and it has that similar vein of trying to do your own thing while being I realized that Nanty-Narking was a good recommendation. If you like this, you'll like that. I completely forgot they're designed by the same person. Well, I mean, this one's designed by Travis Chance and Martin Wallace, but yeah, I guess there's a reason for that recommendation. So Nanty-Narking. Check out Nanty-Narking if you're looking for a game, with the caveat that I think Nanty-Narking really operates best as a 4-player game, versus Cthulhu Dark Providence operates well at 3 and 4 players. I haven't played it at 2 or 5, so I can't talk about those player counts yet. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.